2025 was a remarkable year. The line of IPOs have continued to become longer. The IPOs are bigger. Even the revenues of the companies that we track in the Indian startup ecosystem has gone up. It looks like $50 to $100 million ARR is the new normal. I have my partners Amit, Sanjay and Shripati with me. We'll try to go back in time, rewind the clock. And that is why we are calling this episode the Prime Time Machine.
If you find somebody extraordinarily over the top, right, then sort of back them and don't worry about the numbers.
Yeah. Operate within your area of competence, because there's a whole world out there which is outside your area of competence.
Nothing is as good as it appears. Nothing is as bad as it appears.
We were on the ground, the first floor of a very tall building. We're now, on an elevator moving pretty fast, certainly north of 20 floors and accelerating.
Now we have ubiquitous digitization and real financial inclusion, which I think just changes the canvas in which we are playing.
The plane stayed on the runway a lot longer than we thought, but it is now ascending to heights we had never imagined.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the year-end episode for Prime Venture Partners podcast. 2025 was a remarkable year, and the line of IPOs have continued to become longer. The IPOs are bigger. Even the revenues of the companies that we track in the Indian startup ecosystem has gone up. It looks like $50 to $100 million ARR is the new normal. And of course, profitability is there. We are seeing profitability in early stage companies, growth stage companies, and of course, public companies are hitting the profitability targets out of the park every year. But the most interesting thing is that we are seeing activity in the early stage ecosystem again. A lot of checks are being written, and it somehow, at least for me, reminds me of the early 2013s where there was frenzied check writing, almost an investment every week. It seems like our ecosystem has matured and has come of age. And this ecosystem is about 20 years old, right? And Prime has actually been fortunate to see the ring side of this ecosystem evolved to its current maturity. And Prime has been writing checks since early 2010s. We are in our fifth fund, 50 plus companies. So we thought, what better way than to actually talk about what were the ingredients that led to the ecosystem being so robust and mature today. And so I have my partners, Amit, Sanjay and Shripati with me. We'll try to go back in time, rewind the clock. And that is why we are calling this episode the Prime Time Machine episode. We can't literally use the time machine, but figuratively, at least we can go back and ask the three guys here on what were some of the lessons of the last 15 years and what has struck them as big things that has helped the ecosystem actually mature. So with this, I welcome the three of you to the podcast.
Thanks, Bridge. I have to say this is the only overview of 2025 that did not have AI as a part of the overview.
Well, it has been kept quite silently. I will be inserting it in the discussion. And let me actually use that as a segue to talk about the three segments I want to talk about, right? So I have decided to break down this time machine into three time periods, starting from 2010 to 2015, which I would say the Wild West days of the Indian venture ecosystem. Then 2015 to 2022 or 23, which I think were defined by three big things: Geo coming in and making data very cheap. Then UPI, which made payments democratic. Everyone can now pay. And third, COVID, which actually for many companies was a disaster, but for many other companies, it's actually pulled forward growth. And finally, to your question, Sanjay, the AI era, which is 23 onwards. AI and IPOs, I would say, are the two big themes. So we'll start with the first segment, which is 2010 to 2015. And Sanjay, the question goes to you. What do you think has fundamentally changed in the startup quality? And specifically the founders, right? If you can go back and remember the early 2010s, the kind of founders you used to meet versus the founders you're meeting now, what strikes you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question to start off with. But I think, in fact, even a little earlier, right, 2005 onwards probably, and from my days at MCheck and a few other companies that were starting, I remember talking to Dipinder when he was just starting Zomato in 2008, perhaps, right?
Yeah,
and
8, 9.
I think all of us were, at the time, building a startup seemed like a fun and a cool thing to do. Nobody knew what this could lead to or what it would lead to. And the idea that, I remember once getting a request from one of my VCs saying, well, no, we need for our records, your last year, this year, and next year revenue projections. And I replied 0,0,0, and I hit send. I got a phone call immediately. But we were really, in that mode where we were building what we thought were products that people would need without fundamentally thinking through, what it meant to build a business, right? And it was very focused on things that we had a gut intuition we had seen happening, perhaps in the US, and we were thinking that something similar, time has come for India and so on, right? So the first wave of entrepreneurship was largely about taking models that had worked perhaps elsewhere and trying to see if we could adapt those to India with some of the constraints that we had here in India. Obviously, internet access was very desktop browser based at the time. Payments was credit card based. We lived through all the ups and downs of introduction of 2FA and so on. But the founders themselves really just looked at problems and said, okay, these things should still work in India as well. There is a need to solve some of these things in India. And let's try to solve these problems here. So that was, I would say, the very first wave. And that led to Zomato, that led to Flipkart, that led to Make My Trip, that Amit was at. And that led to a lot of, I would say, infant mortality in the startup ecosystem. MCheck was probably too early. Some companies managed to pivot and hang in there. Some just got shut down. A lot of early shutdowns. But there were some, extraordinary companies like Naukri and all of those that got built also in that generation, right? I think if we fast forward to the 2010 to 2015 era, what happened in parallel, and Shripati and I were privileged to be part of that journey, was the Aadhaar and India stack, laying the foundation, right? Because I think the realization came that these things are still very niche and will cater to sort of the included segment, people where you still have sort of first world problems. But if the masses of India have to be brought into this digital ecosystem and digital economy, which, and Nandan says this from time to time, right? The West was economically very successful before the internet arrived. For China, it sort of arrived concurrently. But for India,
Right
the
first.
digitization and the internet arrived before the economic success happened, and in fact could be the foundation for the economic success, right? Barring some niches. And so that had to be much more of a mass thing. Everybody had to be included, and of course, different solutions could be built for them. So I think the 2010 to 2015 era, the entrepreneurship part was probably still sort of the first generation of companies, Indianizations of what had worked in the developed ecosystems. But at a grassroots level, we were laying some extraordinary foundations, right?
Right.
And so when we get to the second phase, and we'll talk
Yeah.
about that later, you'll see how that has played a role. But all the way through Aadhaar, India Stack, UPI, those were the government railroads that were being put in place. And that was happening in parallel, right? So the entrepreneurs themselves are probably still not fully aware of what
Yeah.
was going to happen at high impact. And we're still building sort of the developed models for India. But in parallel, there was some very important foundation being laid.
So Shripati, Sanjay, I think articulated what happened on the startup side, the founder side. Could you go back and recall how it was like to be an investor? Like today, we see so many funds who are writing early stage investments, right? At least my recollection of that period is about like handful of investors during that time. And if you can just talk about how many investors were there, what was the ecosystem like, and how do you contrast that with what it is today?
Yeah, it is. It almost seems like not just 15 years ago, but like almost like an era before, right? So Prime itself started as a incubator and seed fund, and I recall that concept itself was not there at that time when we were talking about it. Of course, the rationale behind doing that was we were operators ourselves and entrepreneurs. This is what came naturally to us. But I recall when we were raising our fund and being in the US and talking to investors there, they said, "Okay, yeah, I know exactly what do you mean by this incubation thing,
Yeah.
right? What do you intend to do?" So it was that early, and the concepts were that early, even in the US, because even in the US, the funds were like Series A and then beyond and so forth. and that explosion in the funding environment had not even occurred there. So as an investor, that was it was a fairly new space, and the thing which I found is that when we looked at the term sheets of some of the companies which came, entrepreneurs who talked to us and who had raised some money, they all had like bizarre terms. So because these things had been like raised by essentially what I would call not risk capital, right? I'm not saying that they're unprofessional in terms of investing. They just had the investors were not folks who understood the concept of risk capital.
Yeah.
So as a result, you'll have terms like, hey, if you write a check more than 2 lakhs, you need to get my signature as an investor.
Wow. It's hard to imagine that now.
Yes, yeah. I think that the entrepreneur will say, see, yeah,
Exactly.
if you actually try to put that kind of a thing, and we wouldn't probably go ahead and propose it either. It doesn't make absolute sense at all because you're trusting the entrepreneur with so much more than getting a counter signature on 2 lakhs. But really, that was the case. And we would have things like the amount of equity which is being taken and so forth be such disproportionate form that having come from the valley, we could see that these companies were just not positioned or set up to get follow-on capital from any professional risk capital.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work at that time involved both educating entrepreneurs on that and trying to see if you could actually do a reverse surgery to fix those things
Fix it
before we
and
could
professionalize
actually.
this market.
Yeah, that was probably the thing which sticks to
Mm,
my head
got it.
a lot. And this notion of a second-time entrepreneur didn't exist.
Yes. Everyone was first time.
Everybody
First time
was first
founders, first
time.
time VCs.
And you were really looking to the extent that there is some experience, you're looking for entrepreneurs who had spent some time in the Valley or US in some startup capacity to come, who had come here and were looking to things. So this is the early wave of that. And that was perhaps the closest analog to a repeat entrepreneur one could
Got it.
find.
I will say that there were obviously a few other folks as well, right, in the ecosystem who were already there, the likes of Axel and Sequoia and Nexus was set up and Bloom was setting up with us. So we were, I think,
Yeah.
probably they were there like 2, 3 years before us,
2, 3
and
years
then
before.
maybe 5,
Yeah.
and in some cases, and then there was us. So that was really the wave. But I think, and of course, Helion was also there at the time. But there was also absolutely no thought about exits at the time, right? Even for across the ecosystem, nobody had any clue where these things, what these were, and where they were going to show up from. I think we just were building sort of like an open loop system, saying, okay, we just solve real problems, and maybe good things will happen. And I think as we'll talk about how it has matured now, I think going in itself, one is already underwriting to a certain exit and stuff like that. That was never a consideration.
Yeah, no, I remember Flipkart being India's first unicorn was an outlandish thought, in
Yeah.
fact, right? And I remember at that time when I was at Nexus, there were LPs who will ask, how would you think of exit? And we would say that we will have someday a company go public. And you would see the reaction and they will be as disbelieving in it as we were sort of outlandishly believing in it. But, it has changed dramatically since then. And Amit, a question to you, like as a founder, usually when you are starting something new, in spite of all the optimism, there are times when you will feel that it's probably not the right thing and I'm not going to make it. And I'm going to ask you as an investor, right? When you started, Prime started at that time, there would have been moments at which you might have doubted, if at all, the India startup thesis itself, right? Will venture and India ecosystem will ever grow up? Were there any moments like that? And if so, I would love to sort of get a ringside view of how it was to feel like that.
Are you talking about how he feels in 2025? Just kidding.
Time machine.
That is the
Time
next
machine.
question.
So I'll go back just a moment to where Sanjay was, right? Shripati and I landed in India in 2007 for the first time, and we felt like we were on the ground floor of a very, very tall building, right? And there was some professional intent to come back to India, both from Silicon Valley. Sanjay had come a few years earlier. India had 2 million broadband users. I used to be at Google. We celebrated when we got to 100 million ARR. We took the team to an offsite in Sri Lanka. We celebrated when we got to 100 million MAUs for Google,
Google,
India.
yeah.
And I remember being in a Google product strategy meeting where Larry Page, who was then the CEO, attended, or maybe he wasn't the CEO, Eric Schmidt was the CEO. And he said, like 100 million, like how does this matter? Why am I in this meeting? Like when you guys get to a billion, come talk to me, right? And then I joined Make My Trip, which we went IPO in 2010. I think InMobi became the first unicorn, if I'm not mistaken, 2011, right? Naveen and gang, and then Flipkart in 2012. It looked surreal, right? Like it looked like, but the fact that InMobi, Flipkart, and MakeMyTrip all happened back to back as a hat
Yeah,
trick, right?
back to
One
back.
after the other. People suddenly started thinking that I could be one of these guys. And actually, I thought, I mean, Flipkart could have been arguably a little bit of a Me Too. Like e-commerce is happening in the world, Amazon is there, and so on. InMobi was very differentiated to take on ad tech in India, and then MakeMyTrip was e-commerce and our digital commerce, right? So I think people had started believing like this is possible, right? And the term unicorn itself was, even for me, was sort of a relatively new thing, right? Back in the day. So I think that is one. Second is India's always had engineers as founders, right? So I think building was always easy. In fact, Sharad Sharma used to talk about this thing at NPC, saying low orbit startups. Like it didn't take a whole lot of cost to build a startup,
Yeah.
right? So I remember seed rounds being 500K, 750K, and people don't argue about it, right? Now a vanity seed round is $5 million, right? On the
Correct.
lower end, on
Yes.
the lower end. So no, I don't think there was this thing that it's not going to happen. It's just that it's taken a long time to build the building, and like
Hmm.
you said, we're now at the AI and the IPO era. I think more companies have now gone IPO maybe in the last 24 months than the number of unicorns in the first 7 or 8 years, starting 2010. So
Yeah.
obviously the ecosystem has come of some age.
Got it. So one more question, asking you guys to reflect back, and if you can go back in time to one of the founders you met and you severely underestimated, who would that person be? And if you can share how that has influenced your decision making now. And I'm specifically talking about the first 5 years, 2010, 2015, early days, right? Founders
As
will
an
come and
investor
pitch
or even
as
in
an
the
investor.
ecosystem?
Either ways,
I'll,
preferably as an investor, because so that we can understand how you thought about that guy at that moment and were pleasantly surprised
Well,
by.
maybe I'll start with a
Yeah.
shot here. So there's this company of ours called Quizzes, now called Wayground, and I recall meeting them. I think it was 2013, 14, maybe 2014, and they were doing a game in which you had to go around, and it was called Wisen World,
Hmm.
and you had to. It was really meant for middle schoolers for math, and you had to go around solving some math puzzles, and you could actually get some weapons, and you could, get with these wizards and castles and things like that, right? And I met Ankit and Deepak at that time, and they showed us this game. And I'm like, okay. And then they said, oh, but we are getting all these people playing the game. And I said, okay, like, where are they playing? They're playing from all over the world. And I just had this like, what? You guys are sitting here in Bangalore, you have no idea about, what the rest of the world really is, what their tastes are, and so forth. Yet you're able to build a game which is going to do this. And I was just surprised by that, more than anything else, because just in my worldview, that would be just such a difficult thing to do. And they said, no, I think we understand what the students are looking for. We have talked to the teachers and we have been in these groups and so on and so forth. We at that point of time, felt that the game had certain limitations or the product had certain limitations, namely that the content, you would run out of content, right? And then 6, 9 months later, I recall Ankit called me and said, hey, look, we have this, you kind of like solved some of these issues which you're talking to us about. And indeed they had. And they had this product called Quizzes, which was about assessments and making quizzing fun
Fun.
for teachers and for students, and where the content was user generated by other teachers.
Hmm.
And they just showed us this graph, and it was just few weeks of launching, and it had this like vertical takeoff to it, like 5,000 and 10,000. It's like week on week, folks coming in. And we thought that, okay, there is something here. We just don't know what. And so that, and of course, fast forward now, and it is one of
Yeah.
the largest, most well-known and well-respected tech brands.
How much of a check did you guys write at that time?
We wrote a 500K check.
Today, that company would probably raise $5 million in the first round itself.
Yeah, absolutely,
Got it.
absolutely.
Sanjay, anything that strikes you about any founder, right? That
Yeah,
you're
I think
pleasantly
I'll
surprised
pick
by.
also one from our portfolio. Company which is sort of now rebranded as Waggle. It used to be called Nimble Wireless. Hardware geek with 25 years of US experience
Qualcomm.
at Qualcomm, moved to India, built a product he had built 2,000 pieces that were being used by trucks for, cold storage. And he said that this is a global problem and stuff like that. And to me, yeah, this is a hardware guy, and he's claiming that he's going to help people with their temperature monitoring. And, there were a few use cases that he suggested to us. And that's what we still thought, oh, okay, maybe this could be valuable. He said that Sri Ram, as a truck financier, was having conversations with them, because if a truck loan goes bad, what typically has happened is 2 months earlier, the truck has not been moving much and they have to recover the truck, and this will help them locate the truck and so on, right? Okay, sort of, still, but he seemed technically very competent. And, Bhakta was our co-founder at EasyTap at the time. He did a diligence on this and said, well, he's built a product and there are 2,000 pieces of this functioning. That is a lot for hardware. So we backed him, right?
Yeah.
And the company was putzing around for about 5 years. And, somewhere along the way, somebody in the US bought this product and used it to monitor their pet in an RV, which is a recreational vehicle. And one day, Shripati and I had a call. I still remember that.
Context. You tell what an RV is.
RV is a recreational vehicle. It's a very basically go out camping, and when you're hiking, you leave the pet in the RV.
So it's got a bedroom and a bathroom and everything in it.
And if power gets cut to it by accident, the temperature shoots up and the pet can die, right? And it happens all the time in the US. And so they wrote to Shiva saying, hey, we used your thing for it. Thank you. It saved our pet's life, because power actually went off, but we saw the temperature rising and we cut short our hike, came running back, and were able to save our pet. And he researched it some more. And then one day we had a call with Shripati. And I remember it was like at 10:30 at night, and Shiva was on the phone. And he's like, yeah, I have decided I've gone and told all our B2B customers we're abandoning, we're, end of lifing the product, we're not going to service you, we've left the India market completely. And we're selling a consumer product and we have a website called rvpetsafety.com, which still exists. And this is the focus of the company. And we're like, Shiva, you got to learn digital marketing, you got to do this. He said, yes, I've been studying. I've been taking LinkedIn courses at every night. I come home at 2 a.m. because I'm working US time zone. And then from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., I'm actually, educating myself on all this stuff. And he started rattling off all these SEO metrics and things like that. And Shripati and I were WhatsApping saying, who is this guy? Is this the guy we backed, right? And to me, he was close to 50 at the time. And he has now built an extraordinary consumer franchise. It's very heavily, hugely profitable, and should be a magnificent outcome. He's not raised a lot of capital, so it's a very frugally built company. He was running out of money, so he moved the whole team from Chennai to Coimbatore so that the cost structure would go even further down.
Yeah.
And it's, if people look at this consumer brand, he acquired a company in the US called Waggle, which had a pet community of 7.5 million people. Complete reinvention at the age of 50. You would not imagine something like this, right? So to me, he is the founder where we backed something completely different, but we actually backed the person, right? And he showed us that, you just, there is no age limit for when you can reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
And he's just been an extraordinary story. I really hope he gets a great outcome for the company.
It's incredible example, Sanjay.
Totally.
Yeah, to see where he is now. Amit, anything
Let me pick a
strikes?
couple of non-prime examples, because I wasn't an investor until 2015. So Dipinder used to run this company called Foodie Bay.
Yeah.
And I remember, because we were in the broadly same area, Delhi NCR, and having a chat with him once about saying, how do I get restaurants to pay? Right? Because they used to only do reviews. There was no quick commerce,
No
no
transactions.
Swiggy, no Blinkit, no Magic Pen and so forth, right? And he's like, they don't acknowledge, but all the reviews are doing. And I was one of the top rated reviewers on Foodie Bay. That's how he reached out, right? Saying, right?
Now you know who does all the restaurant recommendations.
And then he basically said, just do a VoIP redirect. And then you cut off the calls, because then you measure it and then say, I'll turn off the calls, right? I would never, ever have thought that this guy will build a $30 billion company and possibly go on to build $100 billion. Not that I ever had an opportunity to invest, but having met him several times also, I was like, yeah, interesting, do wipe redirect, let's do this, let's do that, right? Whatever. And then the other one I'll pick is Bhavesh of Ola. The first app he built, I remember it was intercity, not intracity. It was, I think, Mumbai Lonavala or Mumbai Nasik or Mumbai Nagpur or something like that. And I was like, yeah, fine, intercity, like whatever, right? And lo and behold, right, for how big both those companies have been
Yeah.
created, the entire like Zomato or Eternal Group as it's called now,
Eternal
and
Group.
and of
And there are
course the
three
Ola
more
Group. I
ideas
don't
now
even know if there's
getting
a name called Ola Group or whatever. It is just unfathomable. And these
correct.
were very, very young, like these were late 20s kind of guys, right?
Yeah.
And very, very engineer, product manager kind of starting of the funnel, and just unrecognizable now 15 years later.
Yeah. So I have a very
I-
similar example to share of urban company, right? Urban Clap at that time. So I remember I was at Nexus during my brief previous VC stint, and Suvir and I met Abhiraj and the rest of the team. And I remember distinctly that Abhiraj's recommendation from his manager at BCG was one of the best I've ever heard. Like he basically said, "This is the best guy I've ever worked in like 20 years of consulting." And we still ended up passing the deal because we were worried about the operational complexity of that business. And those were the early days when ideas of US were being copied to India, and the idea was being copied was Thumbtack, right? Which was a marketplace for services. But look at the grit and the perseverance of the founder and ability to problem solve, to take that idea, then to create a full stack services company, now to have products. Finally, at the end of the day, it's founders' grit and maturity and just the drive to keep solving is what that matters. And I think we would probably have, as Sanjay and Shripati, you both mentioned, examples of that in our portfolio company
So
as
actually,
well.
Bridge, I was just reflecting on what Amit was saying, and what Shripati and I gave as examples also, right? And what you also just said. I think the first wave, there was very little believability in things that were very India specific, right? And it's clear now, looking back, that there are a large number of problems to be solved in India where technology is an enabler, but the service which is highly operational, also has a lot of value and can create very large companies, right? Where Zomato is today, or Eternal Group, and with Blinkit and stuff. Same thing with Zepto, same thing with Swiggy. The startup you were, co-founder of, Magic Pin, for example, or Urban Company. All these examples that you gave, right? And I don't recall from my days in the Valley any of those companies being sort of VC fundable,
Yeah.
right? Because they were all seen. I mean, it has also changed in the US, perhaps, but at the time, right, in the 2000s era and even early 2015, up to 2015, all of these businesses where there were human beings involved as a part of the service
Operationally
delivery
complex, yeah.
meant
Harder
a
to
lot of
scale.
operational complexity, right? To India's credit, I think we have found places, ways where technology can be used to hire at scale, to build the culture at scale, to operate, to run the business with extraordinary operational efficiency, thin margins, and so on, and massively scale up, right? And I think all of these examples we talked about, kudos to the founders for having done that. That's also creating, and we'll talk a little bit later about, the picks and shovels opportunities, right? Because
Yes.
these are all real large businesses now, and they can't do everything themselves, right? And
Correct.
so I think there will again be a set of opportunities that will emerge, which will come back into the, if you're comfortable building sort of technology driven or technology companies only, that they will create a whole new set of opportunities as well.
Yeah. So we'll shift to the next wave or the next phase in the time window, which is 2015 onwards to, let's say, 2022. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there were three big things that contributed to the India internet economy taking off. One was Geo, which made data cheap. In fact, I recall when we started Magic Pin, we used to measure how many megabytes of storage will it take, because it will take time to download that. And then within 6 months, we just stopped caring about it because it was so cheap. Everyone will have data. The size of the app actually didn't matter. So Geo was one. Second was UPI, which has enabled a lot of companies which we see now at 50 million, 100 million ARR. And of course, the COVID wave, which I will talk about later. But Sanjay and Shripati, both of you were the early members of the Aadhaar initiative, right? Did you imagine that that stack would actually be contributing to such a dramatic change in the Indian startup ecosystem, especially UPI? At that time when you were early?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. right? I do recall, hearing Nandan talk about it and talking about things like population scale. I'd actually not heard that term,
Population scale.
yeah, before, right? Which is thinking that, look, if this has to work, it has to work for the, billion plus people of India, and everything has to be thought about
For
it
that,
for that.
thinking at
And
scale.
if you go back to that time, I mean, the first Aadhaar was issued in 2010, actually. And until several years later, after that, there was just no belief that this would actually happen. If you actually talk to a person on the street or even professionals, they'd say, well, it's a government project, and things of, why will people stand in line to actually, give all this biometrics to do this? There's so many problems. Where will we store this, etc.? How will you do real-time authentication, right? So at that time, the belief, at least in the other team, was we should just do this because it's the right thing to do, kind of
Yeah.
thing, and then wait, for stuff to happen. So I think that we're very fortunate that it did. But that was just the first part, and I think the stack which has been built on top of it, and the effort and the contributions of so many people who are involved in it. Long after I think Sanjay and I had stepped out, is just so remarkable. So the short answer is no. But I'll give you one example about anecdote I remember from that time, even after UPI, Geo had started and so forth. And I recall meeting an entrepreneur who was from Andhra, and he said that, I'm building something. And I said that, okay, so what is your motivation? He said something has changed in the last 3 months. I said, what? He said, previously, in order to actually get data, we would go to the top of a hill near our town or the village where we are staying, wave our phone around, and then we would actually get data. And that's where everybody used to go to actually download anything, right, on the phone. But in the last 3 months, I get it from my home,
This is
right?
2015, 16?
Yes, right around that time. So you could actually sense that something had dramatic had happened, right? That something was really going to change from here on, because all the rails which we had built, finally now actually we're going to start seeing, people going on them.
Got it.
I have the exact opposite
You foresaw?
things. I'll,
Foresaw it happened.
yeah, that it happened. I still think, took a
Yeah.
bunch of miracles, but the believability that it could happen and the impact it would have if it did happen, I think that part, I think we agree, was always going to be thing, right? So the uncertainty about whether it would really happen at the scale was there, but in the small chance that did happen, would it turn this Cambrian explosion open? I think that was the hope that we had, right? Now we didn't know whether it's going to take 3 years or 7 years or 17 years, right? And some would argue it has taken all of the above, but the impact was, I think, going to be very clear, right? Was very clear right at the beginning, the potential impact, right?
Yeah.
But I'll just to talk a little bit about why the uncertainty was so important, was so real at the time. We were obviously going to see a government change in 2014, right? And typically the new government's policies roll back all the things that the old government does. And we've seen that here, we're seeing it in the US, we've seen it all over the world. And it's a natural thing. So, and this was such a foundational element of the previous regime that to expect this government to not, change it dramatically was always a question mark that was there. And kudos to the new government and to the Prime Minister for having actually seen the potential of it. Of course, he had seen it earlier and deployed it in Gujarat when he was there, and to almost turn it on, put it on steroids, and say, no, we're not going to do this by 2018. We have to finish it in 2016, right? I think that was sort of an inflection point for Aadhaar, and all of the pilots we had built all the prototypes we had built were completely about telecom KYC, banking KYC, and so on, right? I personally worked with an engineer to build this and actually had a demo device that I would keep carrying around. Because Sripati and I worked on applications of Aadhaar, right? And this was KYC was one of the biggest applications that we had worked on way back in 2010 itself, right? So it was clear that if it was done right and it reached the masses, this whole eKYC thing would open the floodgates, right? However, I'll tell you the challenge of scale, right? We don't realize it when we say Yeah, it's a government ID program. Everybody got an ID there to come stand in line and, give their, everybody has gone through it, right? Name, address, date of birth, gender, phone number, all 10 fingerprints, 2 iris scans, and a photograph, right? It is generally typically a 10-minute enrollment. But when you think about 1.3 billion people being enrolled over a 6-year period,
Yeah.
that's basically saying that when I snap my fingers, somewhere around the country, 25 people got enrolled, right? It's literally 25 per second that translates to that. Or it's basically enrolling the country of Singapore every week for 6 years, or Australia every month, right? That's the scale at which it had to be done for a one time enrollment, right? And then it had to be shut down basically, right? I mean, now it's only any incremental additions in the population or any updates that has to be done. So building that in a manner where a physical offline system where people had to be brought together for 10 minutes, which meant basically a half day of their time, all that was sort of what was really challenging about Aadhaar, right? So the kudos to both the core Aadhaar team as well as the government team, right, that Nandan and Ram Sevak Sharma, who was the original DG, had put together to execute this. And all for the princely sum of 50 rupees per enrollment, which at the time was $1,
Yeah.
right? So India did this for $1.2 billion, and the UK spent $4 billion and then abandoned their program, right? And so I think it's sort of a miracle that this actually came together.
Yeah. And the number of other things it had led to, including UPI,
Correct. So once that
ONDC,
happened, actually, the rest of it was built on
built
top
on
of it.
top of
And,
it.
kudos to folks like Pramod Verma, who sort of Dr. Pramod Verma, who architected
Yeah.
this whole thing, and Nandan, of course, for supporting this even beyond the Aadhaar journey and really just helping, with the banking ecosystem to visualize it. A lot of work was done through iSpirit, a lot of volunteers,
Yeah.
including some of us here, got together to facilitate it. But fast forward to today, when you see, Jeevan Praman happening at home, where my mom can just look at a phone and, instantly, she gets an SMS saying your life certificate has been
Yes.
done. The gas cylinder guy who comes and shows me the Android phone says, "Sir, can you please blink? I have to do your KYC," and it
Right.
gets done instantaneously, right? When you see that now, you're like, okay, wow, it was really worth it.
Yes. So, Amit, any instance that you recall during that period where any of the companies actually saw a sudden trajectory change because of either UPI or Geo, or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, certainly. So I would say there were three other events that were happening concurrently, right?
Yeah.
Sanjay just alluded to the last one. So Android phones were taking off, and
Oh,
there was this
yes.
talk about the $100 Android phone,
Absolutely.
right? And there were a lot of local brands also, some of which are now gone, like a Micromax, or maybe they're around, I don't know. But like, Xiaomi, of course, made a big entry, Google, Samsung, whatever. So I think everybody wanted to have an Android phone in it, because now data was cheaper, you could get access, you could do various things, and so forth. So that was one. The other one was demonetization, if you recollect, right? So I remember,
Yeah.
including for our portfolio, companies like Neo, a lot of the other fintech ones,
EasyTap.
I think Paytm, I mean, not in our portfolio necessarily, but like suddenly Demon was like, okay, this is like, and my third example will remind you that, what COVID did to like edtech and remote working and hybrid working and Zoom, like the software, right? I think Demon did to all fintechs,
All the
right? And
fintechs.
and
Yes.
UPI adoption and so forth.
Yeah.
So there was some external kind of factor as well, even though
Absolutely.
everything was available, but like Android plus Demon, and then maybe a little bit later the whole COVID and remote working, and remote teaching and of students, right? These were things. So edtech
Yeah.
went through the roof, right? All fintechs went through the roof. Android, of course, or whatever, smartphones as opposed to feature phones, if you remember those, right, were
Yes.
a
Yeah.
very big booster. So I think everybody got a big fillip because of that.
Got it. So any, like, quickly touch upon the COVID wave, which is more recent, right? And I'm generally curious to hear any war stories about companies, how they handled the 2022, 2020 period, especially the companies which are impacted by COVID, negatively impacted by COVID, right? And especially all the offline oriented companies. If you can talk about how did you see those companies manage that situation, and especially how did the founders react, and any comment on how the founders who might be listening to this podcast should think of as lessons, because tough times will come for every company.
I can start.
Yeah, Amit.
Yeah, so I learned a new term from one of our founders, Ashish Munjal of Sunstone, during COVID. It's called zero based accounting.
Yeah.
And I think Neo, Vinay Bagri, Viren Bish, they also had this interesting one where they were doing a lot of stuff around travel, blue collar workers, and so on. So revenue went to zero. In fact, since our podcast was live during COVID, in fact, started during COVID as an interesting anniversary, probably 5, 6 year, I had Rajesh Mago, the now CEO of Make My Trip, and Make My Trip, which was, I don't know, like $1 billion in made revenue, maybe 200-300 million of their revenue. Their revenue went to zero. And I said, it's okay, we can cancel the podcast. He's like, no, this is the time I want to be on the podcast. And so, because now I'm like in the moment of zero revenue for a publicly traded company,
Yeah.
what am I going to do? Right. So the zero based accounting was look at all costs from scratch. Right. This is what Ashish and Sunstone guys kind of taught me. I think Vinay and Viren were like extremely resourceful to say, okay, so if blue collar is not happening, travel is not happening, we'll make a digibank, do something else, right? So the creative, resourceful, of course, resilient, right? And then, of course, the Rajesh podcast we can link to the show notes because he came in the peak of COVID with saying on a Nasdaq listed company, I have to report to the street that I'm going to be zero revenue or close to.
Sanjay or Shripati, one of you.
So I'll talk about a company that we actually backed in the pandemic. It was the first time we had backed a company where we never met the founders physically, right? So to tell you how much trepidation we also had about the
COVID.
whole thing, right? Which was Dozy, right? And literally, I think Gaurav had seen Mudit talking once at some event, and just 2 days before everything got shut down, he mentioned this company to me. I said, oh, it's sort of interesting. Let's talk to them. So all our interactions as partners were on Zoom calls, and there was also a little bit of deal pressure, so we had to move very quickly. And of course, part of the conviction came after we had decided to present him a term sheet where he told us the story about how he lost his arm in an encounter with a croc and a crocodile, and and then continued to build this company. And I said, well, if you went through all that and you're still building this company,
Yeah.
you'll do the best with our capital, right? And that was actually an interesting conversation with him after I recovered from the initial story. But then the company, suddenly saw a huge demand for the product, right? Because there were all these, what they do, by the way, is they have a sensor that goes under the mattress and it passively records all the vibrations of the heart. And then it translates that to heart rate and respiration rate. And now they've also launched blood pressure. And then you can also attach an SpO2 device to it, and then it will also give a complete monitor. And what we were finding in COVID is, you had general wards with like 100 patients in there. Some cases, hotels were being used, etc., where patients were being moved to hotels, and you needed to remotely monitor the patient, right? So it was a crazy amount of product validation that happened in that period of time, because we literally deployed about 10,000 of these devices. But it really was one of those where that wasn't what we had backed. We had backed a company that was selling a consumer device, and it might have been more of a wellness play. But the company suddenly became visible and accepted as a clinical grade product, right? And it had a better DNA for that as a team to be more of a B2B clinical grade product than a B2C consumer grade product. And they used that opportunity to really make the product robust. Um, and that was one of those things that just happened then, right? So the opportunity space completely changed. The size of the opportunity changed. It became 1,000x bigger opportunity, especially in the US market, which we have since discovered. But one had to be very fleet-footed and think on their feet. We decided amongst ourselves, this company is executing well. Let's also co-lead the next round, or let's lead the next round, and write a larger check. Never having physically met the founders.
Yeah.
The first time I met the founders is when we got a small break between I think the first wave and the second wave, and that's when I realized that physically they're quite different from me. Otherwise on Zoom everybody looks the
Looks the
same,
same.
and you've never met them. But it was one of those. And subsequently in 23, what happened is all those devices came back because the government hospitals didn't have the budget for it,
Right.
and that's where it had been used the most. So while they helped in making the technology really robust, company had to basically restart from
Restart
22,
again.
23,
Yeah.
right? But it was phenomenal to see how the founders also grew. I think they had a great opportunity to also grow up and learn and elevate themselves and think, take a much bigger picture. So that was, I think, a very pivotal phase for them. It probably was 10 years of research crunched into two.
Yeah, got it. Shipati, anything you remember? Tough times in your portfolio companies
Well, maybe I'll just
and
talk
lesson for
about
founders.
as an investor a couple of incidents.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not specific to portfolio companies, but I think it is something which remains with me. So one was that we had a call, I recall early in March, this is March of
Hmm.
2020, and we had a full portfolio call. And we kind of said that, hey guys, I mean, this thing called COVID, it sounds a lot more serious than you guys might be thinking about, or even we might be considering here. So for one, I think that you should avoid travel and all these things and mask and all these things and take it seriously. We talked about the zero-based budgeting aspect as well that Amit referred to. And how clueless we were. We said, looks like this will be like a 2-3 month thing.
I remember that.
Right?
And people laughed at us when we said that.
Yeah, like two,
Two,
three
three
months,
months.
like, yeah, so you might have to work remotely and they're like, what? And but yeah, 2-3 months, stuff comes, it'll happen and we
Yeah.
will do this. Because of our previous idea about something like this, one
Looks
for one
temporary. Yeah.
was very temporary,
Very
right? He
temporary.
said, oh, they had this thing about the SARS thing which happened.
Came and went.
It came and went. It didn't really affect us. It's sort of like happening somewhere else. But this one looks like it might affect us. But it'll come, it'll go, keep quiet, it'll just subside and all those kind of things. And the fact that it took, 1.5 years or what have you, and all this global effect and the way it transpired was something we just didn't know. So that one was just a realization and perhaps a humility about how little we know and how some things are fundamentally unknowable
Hmm.
when you're actually
Yeah.
looking at this, because right now it just seems so, of course it happened and this and that and looks so far almost in the rear view mirror. But at that point of time it really was, we were quite clueless about what was going on. The second thing which I remember is got actually nothing to do with COVID, or maybe it does in terms of the tailwind and so forth, which is worth mentioning, is this whole crypto wave,
Yeah.
which happened in maybe 21,
Yeah, just around the same
22,
time,
around
slightly
the
after
same time.
COVID.
It was somewhat, I think people were just had liquidity and they're sitting at home and were looking for something, fascinating to do with it. And at that time, we were having these conversations because all these investments are going on both in India and abroad
Yeah.
on tokens and initial coin offerings. If you recall, ICOs, we talk about
Yes.
IPOs, there are ICOs, and then all these kind of things. And you're like, okay, are we missing something fundamentally? And so we went around looking at, understanding this. I spent quite a bit of time on just understanding the technology behind it and what is the use case and so forth. And came to the conclusion, we had this discussion internally that we don't seem to understand the business case for it. And it was just a realization, hey, look, maybe there is something out there, but we don't
We
seem to
don't
get it,
understand it. Yeah.
right? And perhaps the thing which Warren Buffett says that, operate within your area of competence, because there's a whole world out there which is outside your area of competence. And fortunately, we decided to say, okay, we're not making a comment that there is no business here, just that there is not a business that we seem to
Yeah.
understand.
Especially very hard to do because things outside your area of competence also look very shiny and attractive.
Exactly. So he said, we'll just
Fast
hold
growth.
off on this
Yeah.
one, and which turned out to be one of the more fortunate
Yeah.
things. But perhaps the lesson is still correct.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that brings me to the hottest topic nowadays, which is AI. But I don't want to spend time on what AI is, how does it impact. I think most of our audience and all of us are already aware of. What I do want is if all of you can talk about specific use cases that you're seeing in your portfolio companies of founders actually using AI and dramatically changing their business. Right. I think those stories would be really helpful because everyone knows what's happening at the high level. But where are you seeing actual usage?
Yeah, sure. I can start. So I'll take a company called Planet Spark. It's in the live language communication skills space. Actually benefited a lot from COVID because everything went to, hybrid, digital, etc. And they had a live human coach or a human teacher driven model. And for the longest time, they're like, all learning is only because of humans, right? Teachers have to teach and you have to understand and interact. I think about 2 years ago, they decided to build the so-called platform, which included AI. um, and other software and self-learning and so forth, right? They do like a few 100,000 hours of coaching per month, up from zero, say 2 years ago. Now about 30% of it is all self taught, self learned, etc. And yet they're very different than a Duolingo, right? Or Speak or some of those guys, right? Because they do believe that even Sal Khan of Khan Academy says, right, like human in the loop will always improve outcomes, but can AI help in a meaningful way? And it took a while for them to come around to this. Can a human sort of be supplemented with AI or software or platform, right? So that is one example that I would cite off the top of the mind.
There's another one which I can again mention here. The thing is that there's a lot of conversation, and perhaps it's warranted about what kind of things AI is substituting white collar and job losses and so on and so forth. But there are places where now we can take technology where we wouldn't have even thought about it. So I'll give an example of a company just recently, as last month, about one of our companies called Zooper, which has launched a product. So Zooper is in field service management, and its core focus area is the roofing verticals. It's in the US. So roofers, just to give a little bit of context, are folks who will actually go around fixing your roof.
Yeah.
Right. We don't see many of that in India because we have brick as fundamentally and concrete as our roofs. But imagine if your roof had actually tile and wood and things like that, which is being with which it's made and exposed to the weather elements and so forth. You need to actually go up there and change things because there might be like fungus and moss and all kinds of stuff growing and rats running around and all those kind of things. So you have to periodically go and change it. It's a large industry. And what do roofers do? They physically have to climb on top of a roof. And this, imagine it's like a sloping roof, right? You have to walk around in that. And now you have to estimate, take pictures and figure out, okay, what tiles do I need to change? What is the surface area of this thing? Now go back and figure out what is the cost to, what is the labor cost, what is the material cost, go and collect, talk to the, which kind of roof am I going to put? Am I going to put a shingle roof? Am I going to put a tile roof? Am I going to put a concrete tile? There are all these different kinds of roofs which I'm going to put. Get those things from the catalogs and then put it all together and then give a quote. So as a homeowner in the US, the thing which you like dread is getting this quote back because you have like no idea how much it is. And you have to do it because what last thing you want is a leaky roof and stuff like that, right? So what Zooper has done is that they just launched just last month something called Zooper Glass. And what Zooper Glass does is that it takes a intelligent glass, which is just something which you wear, in which a roofer is completely hands-free sitting on the roof. They have a phone in their pocket which has a Zooper app running on it. And just by looking and just talking to the glass, they're able to say, take picture here, everything, all that information, and they're talking. They're saying, hey, look here in this particular tile, I see a little bit of opening, water might be leaking through this. And here the gutters are actually choked, and hence water is going to come up here. Things are actually off. This tile is broken. Just talking.
Wow, that's incredible.
And it takes all of this information right then and there and creates a full quote, which includes the area calculation of how much is going to be replaced, the roof needs to be replaced, what is the problem, integrates with the catalog of the supplier, gets the pricing, and puts it all together.
Yeah.
And it's all there. And by the way, and one of the anecdotes, which just in the few weeks it's been around, one of the roofers said, well, it saved me from some serious harm because I slipped on the roof, but I didn't have a phone with me. So my hands-free operation
so you could
helped
save
me
himself.
catch, because you can imagine these are slippery and sloping roofs. So these are places where, without AI,
Impossible to imagine few
it's
years back.
impossible to imagine.
Sanjay, anything from you? Any interesting
Yeah,
examples
so
of
look,
usage?
there are lots, and we've talked already a bit about Dozy, so I'll skip that one, although there is extraordinary stuff happening there through AI. Um, Couple of things, right? One of my first days on this job, as a VC in this profession, we'd met Mayfield. Naveen Chadda had told me, Sanjay, you should remember, good companies don't die of starvation, but they could die of indigestion, right? And we did see a lot of that happening in the COVID era, where companies got, suddenly were doing everything full stack and so on, right? So one of the big things that happened, I think, in the last 2 years is several of the companies across the industry and certainly in our portfolio. Planet Spark probably was one of them. Auto Capital that I was going to talk about is in that same space where they'd gone off on a different cost structure and growth at all costs, a very aggressive economics, then realized, things were not going well and had to reorient. And obviously, investors like us had to continue to support the companies. And they've suddenly become lean, mean machines here, right? One of the things that's happened is as a result of that, because they have a lot of domain experience and domain expertise, they are starting to use AI a lot themselves for their internal tools. And Sumit the other day from Auto was showing me, and Auto does two-wheeler financing, right? It's secured asset financings. And collections in secured assets is actually quite different as opposed to unsecured loans. So they have used and built like an extraordinary collections platform for themselves to drive it to their efficiency. Now they are partnering with folks like an L&T Finance or a couple of other large NBFCs and banks who are going live soon. And all of them are looking at the tools and saying, you're going to probably be 5% of my overall business. Can I also start using your tools for my other 95% with a different business model, right? And we've seen this Finag also, right? They're one of the largest banks where they're doing supply chain financing. And the bank is saying, yes, I'll support you as sort of a wholesale partner, and you can go and acquire customers, and we'll give you certain economics. But we would like to use the technology platform in the banking as a service model, and all the AI chops that you have got to run your business are very valuable to me as well, right? So we're going to start seeing, I think, now almost a fight back of the first wave of startups, which were sort of very busy getting their house in order. And now that they have done that, AI has helped them a lot. And I think many of them will start launching products. And who knows in 3 years which will be the tail and which will be the dog. But these companies will be, probably, becoming a combination. And it's in some ways it's similar to Amazon and AWS. Right, Amazon built extraordinary infrastructure so that their
Other
business could be
startups.
successful, and
And then
suddenly they
other
realize
startups
their infra is itself valuable,
Yeah.
and probably more valuable now than the parent company. I could see a lot of that happening, and I think AI will play a huge role here.
Got it. I think so. I'll probably close the discussion with a couple of questions to each one of you, one by one. And I want a crisp, short answer. The idea is to summarize whatever you have seen in 2010 to 2025. So, Amit, I'll start with you. One mistake that you made as an investor early on that still shapes your thinking.
I would say sort of betting on the ingenuity of founders, right? A lot more than Tam and Sam and so forth is one that you think about. It's a little bit like your Abhiraj example. If you find somebody extraordinarily over the top, right, then sort of back them and don't worry about the numbers.
Yeah. Sanjay, for you, one mistake that still
So I
shapes it.
I won't call it a mistake, but I will give the three quotes that keep me going. Two are from friends of mine in the industry, and one is my own, which is a very easy, simple one. So one I mentioned from Naveen Chadda at Mayfield. Good companies don't die of starvation, but they can definitely die of indigestion. So that's one that keeps me going. The second actually is from Shailendra at now Peak 15, which is nothing is as good as it appears, nothing is as bad as it appears. And in some ways, I look forward to one company giving me bad news, that because I think that the other 47 in our portfolio are going to give me good news on the same day. So I think that's also one where, we have to sort of look at everything in perspective. And the third, which is my own, which is the best is yet to come.
Yeah, got it. Shripati, for you?
Which is that I think instead of looking at the best investments are one where you are investing in a company which is going to be a leader in a category which is creating. And that is the best opportunity. Because if it's already an existing TAM in which you are actually going to compete to take share away from others, it's hard because it's a crowded market. But in one sense, I find it easier to underwrite both entrepreneurs and their vision and
In that
companies.
case, yes.
Where
Because all the data is available.
all the
you can
data is
figure it out.
available.
Yeah.
However, if you actually look at the vision and the potential, where you have to imagine the future and the role of and the importance of imagination as an investor, as a VC, is something which I've come to appreciate.
All right. So the last question, Amit, I'll be back to you again. How would you describe in one sentence the transformation of Indian startup ecosystem from 2010 to 2025?
I'll use my building analogy, right? Like we were on the ground or first floor of a very tall building. We're now, on an elevator moving pretty fast, certainly north of 20 floors, and accelerating.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just describe more. Maybe perhaps it's answering a different question, but I'll do that anyway, which is that, what is in my mind, if I describe what from 2010 to where we are today,
Yeah.
like one word, one sentence to describe it is that now we have ubiquitous digitization and real financial inclusion, which I think just changes the canvas in which we are playing.
Especially for the next 20
For the
years.
next 20 years,
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the plane stayed on the runway a lot longer than we thought, but it is now ascending to heights we had never imagined.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So
Very
it's
well
taken
articulated.
longer, but it's much bigger than we had ever imagined.
Yes. Well, with that, we come close to the episode. I think it was incredible to see and humbling also, right? To see the journey of the Indian venture ecosystem for the last, I would say, almost 2 decades. To see what has happened, what has worked, what has not worked, and also the ringside view from the three of you. And I hope our listeners had also enjoyed listening to us. Until we see you all again, thank you and goodbye.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners Podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.